multi-user desktop is and how we make it modern. Talk about some of the problems in our platform that make that a little bit challenging today, or actually in the past. Talk about some of our plans for improving that situation, and then talk about some sort of neat future stuff. So what is it? Really, when I talk about multi-user desktop, I really talk about two different things. And that's having a system that can support multiple users and support a rich experience for multiple users. And then there's the desktop sessions where you want to make your desktop session aware of the system and be presence or lack of presence of multiple users. So why is this something we care about, or we should care about? Well, according to some studies, including Microsoft, 80% of U.S. households have at least a shared computer. I think you could probably make a good argument for other cultures. Maybe it's a similar thing. Even in households or businesses that have multiple computers, there may be reasons why one is more desirable than another. Maybe it's faster. Maybe it has better games. It's connected to a better internet connection. Computers are really fast. They can do a lot more than we usually tell them or ask them to do. They're also very expensive, especially for like a small business or a middle-class family. They produce a lot of heat, take up space, take a lot of noise. If you're in a small office, you may not want a dozen computers. If you get away with that would be good. And when I have guests, when my mom comes to visit, she's probably not going to want to see my porn collection. So I probably want to create a guest account. Yeah. If you don't like porn in your video collection. I make the argument that it's a little bit silly to log out just to let somebody else log in, especially if they only need it for a short time. So, what forms can a multi-user desktop take? Well, there's a few. We're all familiar with fast user switching, and that's sharing a desktop or sharing a computer from one location, switching sessions at that location. There's multi-seat, where you have multiple sets of hardware attached to a single computer and share it that way, at different locations. Something a little more exotic. It's called hot desking. You may be familiar with sunrays, where you can pull up your session from pretty much anywhere in the world. So, fast user switching is something that we're pretty familiar with, but I'll just do a quick review of kind of what's out there. So, OS 10 has a model where it's similar to what we do in Rome, where there's a little applet menu bar. And if you select a user that is not logged in, you are presented with a dialog to authenticate as that user. When you do so, you have this really slick animation to transition to the other session, which is nice because it tells you something's happening, it tells you there's a change, and it also indicates the username that you switched to. XP, being Windows, does it slightly differently. In order to not log off, to switch to another user, you have to hit the log off button. Then you select switch user, select the user you want to log in as, and you are transitioned in a somewhat less graceful manner than you also to the Windows. So a lot of people ask, can't they do that already? I use fast user switching on a free software desktop. Doesn't this just work already? Well, it turns out it really doesn't. It seems like it does sometimes. So I'll give an example of what that looked like at the time of Node 2.16. So like the OS 10 model, there's an applet. We select the user that isn't logged in. We are transitioned in a very ungraceful manner to the GDM screen where we are prompted for a username and given the option to quit, whatever that means. And in the case where, let's stay there for a second. In the case where you are logging in as a new user, you'll be transitioned in that same blinky fashion to a new desktop. However, if you're already logged in, you get this. So you have to authenticate twice, essentially. So what did we get wrong? I already talked about a few things we got wrong. There are a lot more. I'll go through these really fast. Some of them are obvious. We selected user and switcher. The GDM is going to use it. Actually, Matthew's fixed that, but this is at 1.2.16. The screen goes kind of crazy as you're switching UTs. The login screen has a quit button, which makes absolutely no sense to a user in my opinion. It makes sense if you understand how GDM works, but otherwise no. The login screen just simply dies if you let it sit there. It times out. We have the option of either with Face Browser is where you have a list of users in a login screen, or a pretty cool list. Like I said, in the case where we're authenticating as a user who's already logged in, we get the nice screen lock to authenticate again. In some cases, when we're logging out of the user session and there are multiple sessions open, we can end up at a lock screen, somebody else's lock screen, or a completely blank VT with no options at all. When you switch from one session to another, there's nothing that tells any application in the old session to kind of stop doing stuff. So, Totem is still potentially playing a movie, Rhythmbot is playing music, you're still getting voice chats, and you may even have screensaver animation. Also, things that actually work with audio devices or any hardware devices may not relinquish control of those devices. They may still own them. So the new user can't really do a whole lot in some cases. In the case where you have multiple user sessions already open, and you say, plug in a USB disk, which desktop does it show up on? Who owns it? Well, they actually race. So it's a competition to see who owns it. Continue. When we're at the login screen, we have no power management. We all know that. Ryan's noisy about it. As he should be. You close your screen and you're on GDM. You put it in your bag. Probably your black laptop. Potentially we don't have wireless networking at the login screen. And I can think of a couple of use cases for that. You know, you're at home, you always connect to the same wireless channel. You might want to just open a computer and log into somewhere else or share your music with Windows. The Face Browser is very basic. It's just a list that exists of the usernames. Back in, I think, well, a few releases ago, we just added something very basic like already logged in, but that's as far as it goes. We don't have anything like a number of unread messages like Windows has. We don't have anything like you are receiving a call or anything that says your presence is requested. The fast user switcher applet is not seat aware. And I'll describe the seats in a minute a little bit more. But, one example of why that's a problem is if you log into an XDCMP session, so remotely log into your GNOME desktop, you'll have a fast user switcher applet and a list of sessions potentially, but they're meaningless. You can't switch them. In fact, you probably shouldn't show that applet at all. And this one apparently is a pet peeve of some people. David tells me that every conference he goes to, he gets bugged about this. And I think it's a little ironic that since we fixed this problem, he's unfortunately not here to solve it. So when you're not logged in, there's nothing that tells Hal to stop pulling so the CD drive. We have to do that because of some other limitations. But there's really no reason to have any kind of 2-second response time if no one's even there to see it. Oops. Hey, events. And so on. And the list really does go on. Just to drive the point home, one other problem I think we have with the current system is regarding root passwords. So I'd just like to do a real quick survey. Can you put your hand up if you had to enter your root password to say, change the time zone since you got it? Yeah, that totally sucks, right? I mean, we shouldn't have to do that. Or sudo. Okay, so we think we can fix all these things, right? It's open source, we can do this. So what do we need? So this is a really boring part, and I'm going to really run through it. As I was practicing this, I literally fell asleep. So this is sort of the requirements. If you look at all the pieces of the puzzle, pieces of our platform, and you kind of analyze what information you need and what functionality you need to do this better, this is a decent list. For all login sessions, you need to kind of open the session in some sort of database. You need to maintain some state that you know that the session still exists, and eventually you need to close it. Graphical login manager, like something like GDM. You need to be able to list all the seats that are attached to the system. And by seats, I mean pieces of hardware where you can potentially log in and control the system. You need to know if the current seat supports user switching, which is important, like I described, for the fast user switcher app, but for a similar reason. You need to list all the sessions on the current seat, so those are sessions that you can actually switch to. You need to know which session is active on the current seat, and know when that changes. You need to know when sessions are added and removed, and you need access to somewhat arbitrary metadata for those sessions. Things like, is it local? Or is it idle? Or when did you log in? So that's kind of boring. Hal needs to know a few things to do, he can fix that problem with pulling drives. He needs to know what hardware is attached to a seat. He needs to know if the session is active or inactive. And he needs to know when that changes. And also for programs calling into Hal, it needs to know what session it belongs to. So it needs to do a lookup from the PID. So this is, I'm going to skip this, is very similar to GDM's requirements. So I've used the word session quite a bit. And I think we all kind of understand what a session is, or a login session. But it turns out it's kind of difficult to define very concretely, or put constraints on it. So this is, something maybe we come up with for definition, kind of, with maybe a condition that sometimes things can leave and enter, but that's really hard to put concretely, I think. So these are some potential options we have. These are various sessions that exist on our systems today. And it turns out that they're all insufficient, in my opinion. POSIX process session, or process group, definitely doesn't fit the requirements. And one of the reasons is, as an example, Statement Power Manager. It detaches from its controlling terminal to go to the back and minimizes. And when it does that, it leaves a session and starts another one. It's definitely not what we want. We want them to be part of the same session in our definition. OS security context shows a lot of promise. If there was something there that was, we were able to use to identify this group, we would definitely use it. I haven't seen it. I've seen things that are more like roles. PAM sessions. PAM sessions are perfect in scope. They start at the beginning of the login, and they finish at the end. However, there are a number of problems with using PAM for this specifically. They're excellent at determining who. Like you log in, you authenticate, it knows who you are. But it doesn't really know where you are. An example of that is the PAM TPY value is just sent by the application calling into PAM. And it's completely bogus most of the time. In some cases, it's the X display value. And in some cases, like with OpenSSH, it's set to SSH. So we can't really use that. Let's get that. There is prior art. Console has been used by Fedora Red Hat-based systems for a long time. Some other systems use PAM foreground. So it's possible. You don't get the events that way. You get the changes, and it's very limited. Often in concert with PAM, you use UTemp to define a session. That's what's been used pretty much, at least for a couple decades on Unix systems. Various ways that people populate SSRay or even through PAM modules. That's very difficult to rely on because it's completely untrustworthy. Pretty much anybody can add stuff to it. In fact, even your pseudo terminals add sessions to it. So you start up your own terminal, you're going to get an entry with your database. It's not cross-platform. There's a variation of it that's in the single Unix specification, but it's not the same on FreeBSD, Solaris, so that's slightly inconvenient. There are very few rules for the content of the different fields, not to mention the structure. An example of that, again, is TTY. That field is used very differently. If you want to use this, since it's just a file on disk, you have to use iNotify or something worse. Reread it, reparse it, and compare it to your last state. And that's not great, and certainly not atomic. Debug session. Again, exactly right in scope. It starts at the beginning, ends where we expect it to. At least historically, we haven't used these for text lines. Not necessarily a problem, we could change that practice, I suppose. But you may require that all connections, all processes have a connection to the bus. We may not want to do that, I don't know. But in my opinion, the important grouping characteristic of the session isn't so much the connection to the bus as it is the knowledge of the bus address. You know, ignore the fact that it stores it somewhere you can see. But if you don't do that, I think that's kind of interesting. So I'll skip this. This is obviously too high level. Connections to the X server. Downside of that is, again, the connections, especially since X has an interesting disconnection. The other thing to note here is that you probably shouldn't determine sessions on the server side. You'd want to do this on the client side, speaking with respect to X. Skip that. So this is the best definition we came up with. I say it's mostly David Zoidman himself. A session is a collection of all processes that share knowledge of a secret. In a typical case, these processes all originate from a single common ancestor. And that seems to work. So how do we implement that? Very basic implementation. It's something that we hope someday to improve, but we haven't found a need for it yet, really. We just store that secret in the environment. And because of the process of the behavior of the environment, it gets shared. And, well, until you want it to be shared. You can unset it and for exec to pick up that change. And then you can get out of that session. So a possible disadvantage of using that kind of implementation is that there's no real strict boundary. So the boundary is basically Unix permissions. So if someone can read your environment, they can join your session. But that's pretty much the way all Unix security works. So it's not really different in that respect. Okay, so another piece of terminology is seat. So I mentioned that already a little bit. But what we mean by that, what we mean by a seat, is simply a collection of sessions that are on a particular piece of hardware that usually has both an input and an output device where you can control the computer. So multi-seat, the other part of multi-user desktop, or the other possible form, is not really well defined yet. We're working on that. So we have ideas about it. We'll talk about those in a minute. But the one example of multi-seat that we have today is XDCP, where you can connect to a remote machine and control it, just as if, more or less as if you were there. So this is a part where I try to address some of the possible critiques. So certainly there are roles, there are certain cases where this is really not what you want. You don't want multi-users as one laptop per child. You probably don't want them on your mobile phone. You probably don't want them on your Nokia internet tablet. I don't know. It's sort of a rule that I sort of came up with. Is that anywhere that there's any degree of personalization or profile that would be useful, and it's a potentially shared resource, then probably considering multi-user is a good idea. And one example of that is handwriting and voice recognition. So even on a mobile system, maybe having user profiles is interesting. Another idea I had is that perhaps this ubiquity, all this new development in mobile technology pushes the traditional PC in another direction. One that is more integrated with a location, and is therefore more shared than it is today. Thinking, Windows just came out with its home server. We can have media or entertainment centers that have profiles. Okay, so that's sort of a description. So how do we do it better? How do we fix all these things? Well, these are the players as we see them today. I won't have time to talk about many of them. I'll try. So console kit, something that we came up with to address some of those requirements that I said through at the beginning. It's a replacement for UTEM in a sense. It's a framework for defining users and seats and tracking and being able to tell when you change from one user session to another. And also things like, is the session active, inactive, idle, etc. So we have a number of objects that are exported by dbus that live in console kit. And this is one of the more important ones. Session objects. So this is how we've defined the session. It has these properties, and it can emit these signals. You can see them, I'm describing, but see, basically everything that UTEM has, plus more. And I will point out that it has lock and unlock signals. So these can be sent over the system bus, picked up by the session, and things like the screensaver can unlock or lock your session. Seed object, it's also a fundamental object in console kit, and these are also exported over the bus. So sort of generally useful things, like being able to tell if that seed can support user switching, knowing when a session is added or removed, or when the active session changes, so when user switching occurs. Sort of overarching manager object. This is where you instantiate or start your sessions. And I'll describe how that works in a second. And control some other things. The other thing that's worth pointing out here is you'll see over in the signals column, system idle can't change. That's how we fixed HAL. When HAL sees that, it stops polling. So that can occur in two cases. One where we don't have any user sessions open, and one where they're all idle. So here are a couple of examples how it works. So for a text login, through bin login, David wrote a McCann module that talks to the library CK connector, which talks to dbus, which talks to the system bus, which talks to console. And we open a new session. Just as if we were talking, we were adding an entry into U10. It's basically the same idea. This is a protected method. It's protected by dbus security policy. So therefore, we can say with parameters, we can specify properties of the session without worrying about them being untrustworthy. In response to that, ConsoleKit creates a session and in some cases populates the seed and returns this secret that I talked about. The secret is stored in the environment of the children by the PAM module. Until you're done, right? When you're ready to log out, you get this closed session method. Or you just break your connection to the bus, and that works just as well. And the session goes away. Graphical login is a little different. We first look to see if there are any sessions open for that user. If there aren't, we open anew the same way. If there are sessions open, it's sort of user switching involved. We get a list of them. We get a list of sessions for that user. And GDM asks ConsoleKit to unlock it because there's a good chance that it's locked by screensaver. It's not currently active. The way that works is ConsoleKit will then emit on the bus a request to unlock that will be handled in the session. The session is unlocked. Then GDM asks that session be activated. In the case of a Linux seed, a Linux local seed, it will then ask the kernel to activate the VT that that session goes on. It'll wait for that to happen, and will emit an active change signal. In response to this, whether the parameter to active change can be true or false, depending on if you're in a session that's going from active to inactive, or the other way. I'm going to have to kind of skip through this, I think. I was hoping David would come and talk about this part, and hopefully he'll still be able to do that at a future conference. But anyway, we can fix the problem with the poll, and we have the ability to have more advanced policy based on what sessions active or not. And a lot of that policy will, in the future, come from PolicyKit, which is something that David has written a few times. And they would say, right, throw away your first. So he did. And he's now on the second try, and it's looking pretty good to me. And this will give us a place to define policy and for how and other things to query that policy. Like, what can I do if I'm active or not? One other consumer of PolicyKit will be the display manager, what is now GDM. An example of that is we need to query something for what seats are attached to a system. To be able to tell how many excerpts to start, for example. We also want to create just one greeter per seat, hopefully. That's my idea anyway. Rather than any number of them. That's the way we currently do it. We'd like to make the greeter more session-like, so we can fix the problems with power management and other things, and integrate ConsoleKit more deeply. So, is Brian here? No? Okay. So, in my view, GDM2 is just not going to do it. We're not going to get there with GDM2. It's basically at the point where you add a bug, you fix a bug, you create at least one. And it's just not maintainable. So, in May, I kind of took the fateful leap to branch it and kind of start over. And so far, it's going pretty well. It actually works. It's pretty much a complete rewrite. So what's interesting about it? Well, we have a completely new configuration system, which is probably not interesting to anybody that hasn't seen the old one. But we hope that with a new GComp, a new system-wide GComp, we can just plug it in and it should work. It's designed with similar ideas. We replaced the internal and external socket protocols, the way you communicate with GDM and the way GDM talks from one subprocess to another. Those were pretty bad. They were very hard to use, and in some cases relied on Unix signal handlers. It's ugly. And this will give nice interfaces for things like the fast user switcher output and things like that. Dramatically simplify the interface between the daemon and the greeter. The greeter is the thing that asks you questions. There was a kind of ugly interaction before, and that's a problem, I think, because it stalls the innovation in greeters. So we have a lot of very talented graphics people. We should have a really sweet greeter. We haven't had that yet. People have been talking about really nice face browsers in the greeter for a very long time. It's never happened. And I think this is one of the reasons why it was very difficult to do that. We want the greeter to, at least in some fashion, handle power management. Like I said, when you're at the GDM screen, you close your laptop. You want something to happen. And it turns out if we make the GDM greeter a real session with gconf, dbus, and power manager, at least by tomorrow, it will work. We ran into one bug today, but things just work because of the way gconf is designed. That even when you don't have a home directory, you still pick up the system defaults. And with some of the system bus activation work that David and Richard have been working on, you can, in PolicyKit too, we can say in a user session, these are the settings that I want to use in my, as a default, in new user sessions and at the login screen. So that'll just work. Another thing that I changed, is because the greeter is becoming more like a real session, you probably only want one of them. You probably don't want many. So I changed the way greeter works, at least on a seat that supports user switching, to be like a factory. So when you authenticate, it doesn't replace that greeter with your session. It starts it on a new VT. So here's your homework. And I hope some of the people at the Elisa talk, because there are a lot of very talented graphics people, and we need to get them involved in greeters. And everything you need to know to write a greeter is on the screen. So you connect to a bus address that is advertised in the environment, and you talk to an object that implements that interface. And that's all you need to do. So do it, I'll check.
Is this a service published by the daemon or a service published by the computer consumer?
It's published by the daemon. Over a private connection. So the last part of the talk is just a very quick summary of what you as an application author should be thinking about when you design an application. How to make it aware that we're now going to have a system with other users. So it's kind of basic stuff, really. If you have multiple instances of your application, do something smart if you don't get what you expect. So as an example of that, if you're running Rhythmbox in 2 sessions and you're doing music sharing, if you can't get the standard music sharing port in the second session, fall back or do something sensible, or at least give the user some indication. And related to that is don't expect exclusive access to devices. You could get away with that before, but at least from my understanding, maybe Leonard, do you know if we got revoked yet? Yeah, okay. Well, soon we may get revoked in the kernel, so you may get kicked off those devices. So you probably, even before that happens, listen to console kit messages saying you're no longer active. Get off those devices. Or wait till you get off. Give resources. So when you're not active, this is similar to the next item. When you're no longer active, stop doing stuff. Really. You don't need to do anything if you're not visible. And be a good neighbor. So this is just standard good programming practice, right? Don't use a lot of memory because you're not the only one there. Also things like don't make noise when you're not visible. Do your grunt work when the system is idle. So as we're sitting here waiting for everyone to arrive, my CPU pegs, right? And it's make what it is. We're sitting here, we're working. That shouldn't happen. You should wait till now. I'm not using it. Or indexing databases, search engines. So that should all happen when no one's there or no one's busy. So the future, where are we going with this? Well, the first step for me personally is to finish the new GDM. And that's going to take a little bit. My goal is to have it functionally complete by the 220 release, and then we'll spend the next cycle integrating it, and merging it with Trunk. So integrate policy kit. This applies to pretty much everyone. It's not just in the display manager, not just in how, but we all should be aware of this. We should all start integrating it. Especially if you ask for passwords, you should think about using policy kit. Port to the new interfaces. Start using console kit messages to stop playing music when you switch users, or tell someone to pause.
I'm waiting for a patch.
Well, to be fair, I haven't even patched the screensaver to use it yet, so. Waiting for a patch. Start experimenting with hot desking. There's a lot of neat stuff we can do here. Sun already has something, and actually it uses GDM, the old GDM, to do this. But we could do this too. We shouldn't need special hardware. And just as a crazy idea, session hibernation. Why do we just hibernate the system? Why can't we just hibernate a session? I don't know. Maybe we can. So we need you to be a part of this. And the standard open source tricks of build, test, develop, discuss. And those are the lists that you can do it on.
Yeah, that we can't actually read.
Well, that's just we talked about console kit on the HAL list. It's for lack of anything better. And yeah, it's really bad, isn't it? Display manager stuff or GDM stuff, that's on the GDM list. Brian seems really open to this idea. It's not a nasty fork. He thinks that it's a good idea, from what I understand. I think he's here somewhere. And thank you for your question. Do we need a mic or we just
You have a hindsight library, like some console kit or whatever, you can do a simple call, like, am I active, or some sort of callback, or maybe a geoptic signal that tells you if you're in a session that's going away, or you basically have to get on debus for yourself.
The latter so far. You have to get on the bus. Or use debus send. Just debus send in the interface and just look at the session ID. I actually have a system, but you use the Python bindings, which are really easy. So just a console kit, get my session ID. Actually, I can go back. Right, so the first thing you do if you wanted to do that is know if you're active or not. You either get current, well, we also, because of that, but similar to get session for Unix process, you can do this by your process ID or the cookie that you already know, but we actually have a shortcut and it's get current session. So once you have your session ID, you can talk to the session object, and there's just a parameter that says exactly.
It seems kind of like a lot to do. You just answer the simple question. Should I define user query? I think it would be good to have.
Well, always create a library. That's what I like. I think people in general don't like libraries, but.
Well, you could use that.
You don't have anything more abusive than that? Listen. Repeat that. I thought you were going to roast it.
Oh, no.
Back?
So there's a couple of things that are going to hurt here a bit. One of them is that switching BTs and X is the ugly at the moment.
Right.
And I don't know, I know the technical reasons for it, I don't know if that can be fixed. And the second is I know in some cases, such as with the NVIDIA driver, it wouldn't accelerate on more than the first desktop. There's not much use that being on the GDM reader, for example. So
With proprietary driver, why don't they just fix it? When people start using fast user switching, NVIDIA will fix their driver. I don't think
yeah,
it should
sure,
be our
everyone
problem.
says that. My point is that there are problems with multi-BTX that are going to hurt a German desktop.
Well, like I said, I couldn't even approach any, all of these today, and I'm not really qualified to talk about it anyway, but kernel node drivers, from what I understand, is the answer to at least the first part of your question. And it's being able to transition without changing the VT mode from graphical text and back again.
So yeah, but obviously not.
So you can do something
make it
like.
hard to, obviously, having not been there yet, it make it hard to get the stuff on the desktop today without sort of going backwards a bit in some way to other areas.
Or to go backwards.
Sorry.
I don't know why you'd be going backwards.
It's definitely going forward, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We
Well,
just
I
have
said
to,
other
you have to
areas
go
going
deep in
forward
order
in
to
this
fix
area.
it.
You're also going backwards in the area where when you log in, suddenly your screen starts flickering, and that's quite ugly. So
Yeah, you'll get two BT switches this way.
Oh, you mean with the new GDM design, doing the factory
yeah,
thing?
exactly. So,
No, yeah, it's going to be ugly. And so
I guess
hopefully
my point
people will
is-
start fixing it.
yeah.
So, that's my view, is that we need to show the, roll up the carpet. Kernel mode drivers is supposedly the answer to this ugliness. And one thing we hope to do is be able to even have a little animation client that can grab frames from both the frame buffer, front of both the frame buffers, and kind of do that nice switch thing. That would be pretty cool. And that would be a really nice way to log in. You can even have delay a second as it's starting, and say starting our session. Yes.
I had a quick question. Are you going to talk to people that do usability about creating a guide for what applications should be doing when doing fast user switching? Because I can think of at least two applications that I'm maintaining. One of them is Totem, obviously pausing and stopping playing sounds, using as little resource as possible, when not actually active. That's something that's pretty straightforward. The other ones that I presented this morning, shame that you didn't come to my talk, is Gun On Phone Manager. And
You didn't see me though. I'm too busy flirting with Richard.
Gun On Phone Manager, basically you've got that concept that one user's got one mobile phone. What do we start doing? Where do notifications go when we're not actually the active user? What do we disconnect from the phone? Do we have notifications pushed in some way?
I was told I'm supposed to repeat that question. I'm not going to. Just starting about that. I don't really have the answer. Would I like to talk to usability people? Sure. Yeah. They know a lot more about that than I do. Yeah, we need to come up with some rules. Like, for example, something that I know about, you do too. On the written box list, there's some debate about what we should do when the screen's locked, for example. Do we pause music when the screen's locked, or do I still listen to music while I'm making a sandwich or taking a leak, you know? In my view, you stop playing music when you switch to a new user or back to the GBM screen. But yeah, there's probably room for some discussion on that. Anybody in the back? Here.
There was a discussion started about some of the issues, mainly about screen locking and switching users from smart screen on the Ubuntu Wiki. It started from a really terrible step. But then there are people like coming up with ideas about one GDM BT and then starting maybe using a different one, things like that. And then I suggested that the difference between the screensaver little GTK switch using that and the actual GDM screen shouldn't actually be there, because GDM itself could just be a small GTK box that comes from the phone. Although they seem to have now just told America to be able to make some 2D1, which is really good. But they're just adding face value, just so that when unlock this, when you do mouse or something on a lock screen, essentially the same screen as the login manager.
Right.
You have access to all these from where it tells you where you've got emails and things like that, rather than switching back to the regular.
No, that's a good question.
It
So
wouldn't make sense, or having two like.
let me try to repeat it. You tell me if I get it right. So why do we have a lock screen interaction on the screensaver, and also something but different at GDM?
Yeah.
Okay. No good reason, really. We need the lock screen thing. Mostly historical reasons where we didn't do user switching. And, you know, if you do like even like hotkeys, if you somehow end up on a desktop, you shouldn't get stuck there. There should be a way to get back to GDM.
Yeah. I mean, the stats that someone originally made said it should be more like Windows, so when you
No, I
do
agree.
your mouse, it goes back to login
I
screen.
kind of agree with
But
that.
that was just ridiculous, because if you've got screensaver going and move the mouse, it goes to login screen.
I'm not sure it's ridiculous. I think that maybe we don't even need to stay on the screensaver screen. We can probably go to GDM. The only part that gets tricky, I think, is when you do with your devices. You give up your devices when you do that. You stop playing music or whatever. So yeah, it gets a little funny. So we need some maybe designers to help us out.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One is actually, I didn't really get how the login works with tangible stuff, because there was something about maybe it may change, which somehow suggests that the disconnection is staying open all the time. How is it supposed to work? Who is
Through Pam.
And Pam is walking off the process of what?
No, Pam can keep state, and that's sort of one thing he does.
Yeah, but they can't keep up in advance because of the connection to the server.
I know.
Because it's not processing. It's just some chat.
Login is. Login.
Yeah, but login doesn't stay around.
It does.
Login access, so the shell or whatever. It's a rule that surprised.
So forks.
So forks, so there's a background process.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Okay.
That's how you do the Pam close. We don't really need to probably, but maybe do it for you time. Yeah, no, it's
People
PAM wasn't my idea. That's the only way we got it into upstream. We originally David wrote a patch actually to patch logging thing and the Red Hat maintainer didn't patch it. PAM is just an easy way, so we didn't even have to change bin logging to do that for it.
The other question I had was, currently a lot of different agents running user sessions like call manager, like Bluetooth manager, like full audio, whatever, and they all have to run. And most one of them has to run at the same time, so there always has to be some handover, so that the system service knows which agent to talk to. So have you ever thought about finding some kind of common way to do this? Because I know now that Pulsar does it totally differently than Parmesan, because I've noticed it currently doesn't do it at all, I think. So,
That's sort of one of the main drivers of a lot of those things.
and I'm quite sure the way I currently do it with Pulsar is not going to work with anything else but Pulsar, maybe some other way or the other level harness. So, I think there should be some mechanism and dealers which some common semantics which everyone uses, which should be in a way integrated with consortia, so that consortia can switch over which agent to use.
Yeah.
And all agents stay around, but it hasn't.
Well, we've thought about it a little bit. The trick, right, is that you want to do it synchronously, especially for you. Maybe not so much for Richard, because all that stuff happens in Pynots for Richard, but not for you. You need it right away. That's a little harder with dbus and with the kernel interfaces. The kernel interfaces are asynchronous. We wait for them in our process, but they're not. You can actually make them synchronous if you connect to the signal handlers, but only one process can connect to the signal handlers, and XLR does that. So that kind of sucks. Maybe we could fix the kernel. But we should definitely talk about that after.
Okay.
I think we're running short on time, so if you don't mind, we can just talk after. Is there anybody else with the one?
I can't really imagine the kernel guys ever implementing any kind of cube effect for key switches. So how impossible would it be to get all this working on one VT rather than having one VT per user, one VT per reader?
User switching on one VT? You have to do some sort of like hybrid. It's very difficult.
Well, you have this crack idea of you have an X server and lots of XGL instances right inside of it.
I think a lot of people are allergic to that idea. I think even Keith doesn't think that idea. Yeah, so, I mean, the nice thing about the X server, right, is it's really just a mechanism and stuff. And you notice, like, besides kernel drivers, X is done. Like, it works great with this. It sort of just does its thing. I mean, well, with one exception, maybe once we get house support in X server for all right?
First, about the time frame for new version of GTM, new generation of GTM. Do you think it would make it in GNOME 2.20 or 2.22? And the second question is, as you said, GTM current revision reached the limit of maintainability. Would it be fair to make kind of public announcement, no new features for GTM 2, we only fix clear bugs, regression, security holes, we effectively freeze GTM development as it is now, and all you use code, please write for GTM next generation, because otherwise people will just submit code which is going to be obsolete by time soon.
That would happen if GDM actually had contributors.
Well, the question was, when is this new display manager going to be done? And like I said, my goal is to have it functionally complete at 220, and then we'll spend the entire next development cycle, unstable cycle, merging it with trunk. Or we just start a new project. It's hard to tell. There's really not much that's saved. So merging is sort of not really what I kind of think. And the next part of the question was, should we make some sort of announcement saying that we're deprecating existing maybe. I'm not the maintainer.
Yeah, I realize this question.
He's
more
here,
Brian,
supposedly.
but since Brian is not here, I'm asking.
Yeah, that's his call, I guess. So we should ask him that. I guess that's about it. Thank you.